Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Turning the Tide on Plastic Waste. My name is Beth Elliott and I'll be moderating today's event. Before we get started, I'll just go over a few items to make sure you have the best experience with us today. You may be listening using your computer's speaker system, but if you would prefer to join over the phone, just select phone call in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You can submit questions to our presenters today by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. We'd love to hear from you, so please send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll answer as many as we can at the end of today's presentation, but if we don't have time to answer your particular question, we'll do our best to get back to you with a response after the webinar. So today we're going to be talking about the ever-growing issue of plastic waste, how we got to where we are today, what work has been done to date, and what more we can do. We'll be discussing one solution, the Responsible Plastic Management Programme, and how you can use this to start your own journey towards reduced plastic use. And we'll also hear from two companies who have agreed to share their stories of their own journeys with us. We've got a fantastic panel with us today, all experts in their own fields, who will be discussing the issue of plastic waste and how we can tackle it. I'm delighted to be joined by Dave Garforth, a sustainability expert and founder of the Responsible Plastic Management Programme, Kimberly Coffin from Lloyd's Register, who brings expert knowledge and experience across the supply chain, Bronagh Miller from Queen's University, who is working on some fascinating innovation projects at the university's Polymer Processing Research Centre, and Adam Hall from Internet Fusion Group and Alan Lewis from Meadow Foods, who will each share their experiences with us. So let's get started. Dave, I'm going to come to you first to discuss the issue of plastic waste. So we can see on this page here, there's some pretty grim statistics out there, Dave, on this slide. What's your view on how we've reached this point?
Thank you very much, Beth. Yes, some hard-hitting stats really on this awful challenge that we face in the world today. And these figures have been well publicized now for quite a number of years. You know, as it says, it's estimated that over 8,000 million tons of plastic have been made since 1950. That's a lot of plastic, and we continue to make plastic every year at a rate of about over 300 million tons. And it's increasing every year. And the challenge is plastic waste. It's ended up in the oceans. And even at the current rate of around about 8 million tons a year, which is an incredibly enormous amount of plastic, it's going to increase year on year on. From what the experts are predicting for the next 20 years, it's going to triple. And that's equivalent to about 50 kgs for every meter of coastline in the world. So we really have an enormous challenge in dealing with this, the problem of plastic pollution. And of course, we've got new challenges facing us, PPE, which of course is being used to combat COVID-19, and it's saving people's lives. And absolutely, that's a necessity. But we really, again, need to fix the problem of what we do with this new plastic waste. And there's a frightening statistic in itself, face masks. I mean, they take 450 years to break down. And when they do break down, they actually just break down into microplastics, which gives us another problem that we have to face.
Yeah, I've been seeing some really sort of, again, hard-hitting news headlines around this issue. And we've seen images of face masks and gloves and things being strewn across beaches and in the oceans, which is, yeah, very sad to see. So Kimberly, what's your view on this? How did we reach this point today?
Yeah, thank you, Beth. It's great to have the opportunity to share my thoughts on this subject. You know, working very closely across the food, specifically the food supply chain, I think we saw some very heartening signs in 2019, whereby there was a significant shift in focus on sustainability commitments by many global food manufacturers and retailers, looking at their supply systems and looking at for improvements in the space of sustainability as well as responsible sourcing, including plastic reduction. Really, I think that set us with a great expectation for 2020, that it'd be an important year in moving the circular plastic economy forward. Unfortunately, with the onset of the global pandemic, as Dave has already spoken a bit to, there have been a number of pressures on those organizations to both keep workers safe as well as the broader community safe. And many have now really faced a step backward on their best intentioned environmental commitments that they had made to really tackle this very important issue of plastic reduction. Would like to share just a couple of examples, really to kind of call out some of those key things that we've seen that have, offered, that the pandemic has offered by way of challenge in respect to the use of plastic. Really, we've seen a widespread reintroduction of single-use plastic shopping bags, which had really been nearly eradicated in most of the developed countries. Likewise, with this increase initially, I think, of takeaway and home delivery services, we saw a real increase in things like disposable cutlery and single-serve sachets. And even more concerning is as we've started to open up the hospitality sector, this is growing to protect the communities as a whole. We've seen also, due to kind of build consumer confidence, and increase in the use of soft and flexible packaging wraps on fresh produce. And there's a lot of debate on whether that's really necessary. And then finally, as Dave has already spoken to, is around this increased demand and use of PPE, both by the community, but also within operations whereby there was some limited use, but more widespread need to keep those workers safe in those operations.
Absolutely. It seems that in tackling one problem, we've kind of added to this problem of plastic waste. Alan, can I ask you if you've got anything else to add here?
Yes, thanks, Beth. I think the biggest problem, plastic is good for what it does, and I think from a manufacturing point, there hasn't been any alternatives down the line for us to use. So plastic, unfortunately, is the go-to material that we end up using. And I just don't think that there's enough research gone out there, certainly in the food manufacturing, to find a viable option instead of plastic. I think that's one of our biggest problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing your insights there. So we obviously have done things to try and tackle this over the last so many years, decades, but you can see on this screen here, there are a number of initiatives that governments, companies, and even consumers have taken to try and help tackle this problem. But have they actually done anything, and is there more we can do? So Adam, can I come to you first on this, please? What's your views on whether we're doing enough?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Beth. I think there's much more to do, and you can see that the tracking of the increase in plastic production, we need to follow that with reductions. The amount that's arriving on our beaches and going into our oceans is just not going away. It's accumulating. So I certainly think we're not doing enough. I think there's lots of levers that we can pull, but they're just not being pulled. And the issue at the core of this is the proliferation of plastic. The unnecessary plastics that we have, and the single-use plastics, and that actually it's all linked because it's a subsidised product. So there's a lot of work to do, and I think we've only just scratched the surface of actually what can be done and what needs to be done. There's a lot of work to do.
Yes, thank you. Dave, is there anything else you wanted to mention here?
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, I think we can recognise that there are some good initiatives that are working at the corporate level. Things like such as the European Plastic Pact and in-country plastic pacts. So they are making good progress to some extent, and efforts are moving forward, and we need to recognise those. It's probably too that we probably need a little bit more substantiation and measurement of what those efforts are, so we can get a true understanding about performance towards targets which have been set. And of course, there is legislation. It's coming in. There's a single-use plastics legislation, which is bringing in bans on certain types of single-use plastic. And of course, things like extended producer responsibility schemes, which will introduce taxation at some point in terms of a tax on plastic waste. Whether these are happening quick enough, I think, is a question that we need to think about. And I think when that's set against, as I mentioned, the amount of virgin plastic that we continue to produce, in excess of 200 million tons a year, and then realise that of all of that, a good majority, nearly 50%, is single-use plastic packaging, of which we're probably only recycling on a global average at around 10%. Certainly some countries are doing better than that, and they've got ambitious targets, and they're making improvements. But it's still a huge problem. and we need to really look at how we connect up that plastic value chain. And it really is a value chain. Every year we're quite literally throwing away an estimated $80 to $120 billion worth of resources, which are in single-use plastic packaging. So that doesn't make good business sense. And then when you add on to that the fact that a plastic bag, it's got a single-use life of about 20 minutes, but it lasts for about 20 years in the environment. And as I mentioned, when it does degrade, it becomes microplastics. So we really need to turn away from that, and we really need to rethink the entire plastic value chain and change it from what really is currently a linear system, and we need to move to this circular model where plastic is designed, it's manufactured, and used and collected for recycling and reuse before we think about that disposal thing. And of course, that's going to require everybody to get involved, all the actors, from the resin producers, the packaging manufacturers, brand owners, the collectors, waste sorters in the system, the recycling sector, and governments, of course. It requires everybody to come together to act, and similarly, we also need to educate and bring along the consumer in this journey as well, so that we grow their understanding, because consumers really do have a concern about plastics. But again, they need support in that journey, and how to encourage and and see how they fit into this. So yeah, plenty to do.
No, that's great, thank you. That stat you just mentioned, 20 seconds used for, and it takes 20 years to break down. That's really gives us food for thought, I think. So we are doing some things, but it's clearly not enough. So what else can we do? Brona, can I come to you now? I understand that you've been doing some really interesting work in this space. Can you share some details with us, please?
Yes, thank you, Beth. We've been working in the university on designing products, designing packaging for a more circular and more sustainable life cycle for maybe 20 years in the university. It's always been something that we have been very interested in before media and the general populace got invested in that topic. We have spent lots of time looking at very simple things like taking packaging at the end of its life, like a milk bottle, and turning that into another product like underground drainage pipes with different companies that we're working with, that kind of secondary recycling, where you're downgrading the properties of a material into another product. But what we're getting more interested in at the moment is primary recycling, where you can recycle the same sort of article back into the same function. So, maybe taking that milk bottle and instead turning it back into a milk bottle, or taking food packaging and turning it back into food packaging. I mean, we're extremely interested in sustainability, and one of the key things I think we need to start thinking about is not how do we recycle the millions of tons of materials that we currently have sitting there as a problem today. We need to start thinking of the future and start thinking about how we can design those products and that packaging in the first place to make it suitable for recycling at the end of its life. Dave talked about keeping the value in the materials. I mean, plastics are extremely versatile, extremely valuable materials. We need to maybe start thinking that milk bottle is worth £5 and ensuring that we retain that £5 value instead of thinking of it as a small, lightweight piece of material that we can quite easily send to landfill. Let's get as much value as we can out of that material. Let's send it through the recycling process. Let's turn it back into a milk bottle, turn it back into food packaging, and when we can do that no more, turn it into a drainage pipe. We can do lots of things to keep that value in there. Sprite, Coca-Cola is an example recently where they changed from a green pigmented bottle to a clear bottle. By that simple step, they possibly compromised the brand value of that product, but in doing that, they made sure that bottle at the end of its life was much more valuable because it wasn't pigmented and would have lots and lots of new uses. So we can wait for legislation, we can wait for policy, we can wait for the media to drive us into doing these things, but collectively coming together in collaboration and changing design at the beginning, I think really gives a chance for people to retain the value in that material and to get people into the mindset instead of how valuable plastics are, how good they are as a packaging material and how valuable they are for sustainability of all the food that we produce and need to keep ourselves alive on the planet today. That's my thoughts on it.
Oh, that's really interesting. That value comment is fascinating. I don't think people think that way. Certainly consumers wouldn't think in that way, but that's definitely something we should be bearing in mind when we, before we are quick to throw something out. Thanks, Brona. That's absolutely brilliant. We're now going to move on to talk about one of the solutions to this problem, which is the Responsible Plastic Management Programme. Dave, can you talk our listeners through what this is and how it works?
Absolutely, thank you, Beth. So yeah, the Responsible Plastic Management Programme has been established as a response to this enormous challenge of tackling the plastic pollution crisis. So yeah, we're a global cross-sector assurance programme. We're from the world of certification and sustainability standards, and really what we've done is design a programme to help organisations take positive steps. And that's positive steps in reducing, reusing and recycling plastic before we consider disposal. We're a non-profit social enterprise, and what we've done is developed a standard. So we operate a standard for responsible plastic management. We also have a directory of engaged organisations that come on board with us on the programme, and we offer a trust mark for recognition of achievement for those that take the journey in terms of responsible plastic management and start to put strategies in place for improvement of that position I mentioned about reducing, reusing and recycling plastic. So a key aim is to help organisations improve their performance in plastic, and plastic as a resource that we've just been talking about, and reduce plastic entering the natural environment. We support this aim by partnering with research, with advisory and with certification bodies, of course, such as Lloyd's Register. And if you look at the next slide, thank you very much. So what else do we do? So we're offering plastic management training, so to help businesses and organisations raise awareness, and that training covers things like general introduction of what the plastic pollution problem is and awareness about the different types of plastics, and then more into the details about how an organisation might undertake a baseline review and start having an understanding about the plastics that they use, that they procure, that they use in the manufacturing processes perhaps, and the plastic which they ship. And eventually to help them implement a plastic management system to start getting accountability for that. And then through the course of time, that journey, that improvement can be measured, and that measurement can be done through a verification of perhaps claims and statements that they wish to make about that performance, or it can be through certification to the standard that we've developed. Of course, those two parts are part of our Lloyd's Register third-party credibility, if you wish, in terms of providing that independence to those statements and independence to the certification to a standard.
Okay, Dave, before we move on to talk about the standard itself, is this applicable to all sorts of companies?
It certainly is, Beth, yeah. So we've developed a cross-sector standard. And we've engaged organisations at this point in time in all types of sectors, from workspace environments to food manufacturing environments, to seafood too, to add to that, to IT companies, aerospace companies, shipping companies as well, such as ports, for example, as well. So yeah, it's already proven that the standard works across sectors. And yeah, we're inviting all sectors really to come and engage and have a conversation with us.
That's great, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the standard itself. So Kimberly, can you give us an overview of the standard and what it involves?
Absolutely, Beth, thank you. I think one of the first and foremost things that is very important to to point out is that there's been really careful consideration given in the development of the format of the Responsible Plastic Management Standard to ensure that it aligns with other internationally recognized management system certification standards that the companies across the various industry sectors use, such as ISO 9001 and ISO 14001. And kind of by adopting that fundamental format and structure, it really provides for a systems approach to help businesses get organized, understand their current state, and implement actionable plans to deliver demonstratable, and I think demonstratable is a really important part of what the standard and the requirements of the standard provide, demonstratable improvements over that 3-year certification cycle. I'll speak briefly, not get into a lot of the detail around the requirements, but I'm sure people will want to have an understanding of what the basic requirements are of the Responsible Plastic Management Standard. And very much it's structured around using 5 key steps that are essential for a company to demonstrate the adoption of responsible plastic management continuous improvement cycle. And it very much starts with, as you know, you would expect in most internationally recognized standards do, with senior management commitments and policy, which really requires a fundamental, which is really fundamental to demonstrating the whole of organizational pledge to responsible plastic management and team engagement to actually drive those achievements and those performance improvements. Steps 2 to 4 set out the very specific core requirements, if you will, that reflect the implementation of an effective system and systematic practices through, 1, a plastic review and register that reflects your organizational plastic footprint. And it also requires, and in pulling those pieces together, it's about mapping the product packaging and waste up chain, down chain, and through to end of life. Second key core component is around that action plan development and implementation, setting out what are those your management strategies, including the priorities for reduction, reuse, and recycle prior to disposal. And the final key element and component of that implementation piece is what are those monitoring mechanisms and reporting that will be used by way of your performance against those action plans that you've set out. The final step is really around, and I think this is really quite an innovative piece, is the standard actually has requirements that have set out that require organizations to focus on promotion of the results, both positive and negative, through transparent communication, both internally in the organization as well as externally to the broader community and your consumer base. I think that we have had a number of questions with regards to, look, I already have committed to the National Plastic Pact, or I've got these commitments and pledges. Why do I need to go through a certification process? Why do I need to implement the standard? And I think something that's very important, and Dave's touched on it earlier, is well and truly this, by seeking certification and going through and applying the actual systematic elements of the Responsible Plastic Management Standard, it actually takes you to a further step in that it provides for independent evidence that an independent assessment of evidence that actually supports and validates and verifies that the commitments you've made well and truly are working and how you're progressing against those. And fundamentally, it provides a higher level of credibility to your organization's performance and achievements.
That's great, thank you. And I'm assuming that because it's independent, it's a very sort of robust and credible way for a business to demonstrate those greener credentials. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Absolutely, Beth.
Okay, so if any organisations are interested, what do they need to do next? So Kimberly, Dave, can I sort of ask you, and I know Kimberly mentioned some of these steps, but perhaps you could give an overview to anyone listening who's interested. What would be the first thing they need to do next to start their journey?
Thanks very much, Beth. Yeah, well, the first step really is we're asking businesses to register their interest either with ourselves or with Lloyd's Register. You know, so take a first step, register interest, and have a conversation with us. We're hoping through that businesses will engage and see the value of undertaking this journey and implementing the Responsible Plastic Management Standard. We can help with that implementation through help developing a plan to support businesses, a journey if you wish. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we can provide other services if businesses wish to take those services, such as training support, raising awareness within the business, and helping them implement the system, if you like, and set up a plastic management system with those elements that Kimberly spoke about in terms of management commitment, developing a policy, getting active in terms of a baseline review, and using that, if you wish, to start to really think about the strategies and the objectives and setting targets for improvement. So understand what the baseline is and then move forward on that journey. And then, yeah, when they're ready, invite Lloyd's Register in to start looking at that verification piece. I think Kimberly can probably give us a few words.
Yeah, look, thanks, Dave. Very much when we get to, you know, that point whereby you've worked very closely, you've got active, you've got your systems together, there's a couple of ways that we can progress and we can help and support. I think one point that is important to throw out by way of kind of assessing where you stand and getting started is, although it doesn't form part of the actual certification process, we can surely help by way of provision of a gap analysis, where we can help you identify areas of strength and weakness, as well as any critical areas of focus that you might want to go back and revisit prior to starting your journey to certification. Certification in and of itself is a two-stage process. Stage one is whereby we come in and we undertake a document review, and really that's about confirming the level of your preparedness of your documented responsible plastic management system. Then the second part of that process is what we call our initial assessment, our stage two, and that's typically completed on site. And really that's a real focus on determining that the right objective evidence is available, demonstrating the extent that your system has included all the relevant plastic use items, as well as the effective implementation of your system procedures. Then, going through that process, we put together basically a report. There's recommendations made with regards to certification, and it goes through a very detailed independent assessment by our internal technical experts to make sure that all of the requirements of the standard have been adequately addressed. And upon successful completion of that process, certification is awarded, as well as the ability to use the trust mark that is that has been set in the context of the scheme requirements for this particular program. Step 5 really is then around each year we'll come back and we'll actually undertake an annual review by way of a surveillance review of how you're going, how is your system progressing, and basically that it continues to be implemented, maintained, and you're demonstrating some continual improvement over time.
That's great, thank you. And am I right in thinking, Dave, that once certified, that business will go on an online directory for any buyers or other interested stakeholders to see?
Yes, that's right, Beth. So when businesses engage, we list them in the first instance because they've demonstrated commitment to getting involved and implementing the standard. And then through that journey, we can also give them a further recognition by getting trained, becoming aware, and then on that certification or verification, we can also list them as being a certified organization to the RPM program. And of course, thereby, you know, this is an open directory for customers, stakeholders, clients, partners to view, and they can see that, you know, these companies are making genuine commitments and efforts which are measured transparently and are being verified and certified through Lloyd's Register to achieve, you know, to achievements. So this is a credible, robust statements that businesses can then use within their own sort of like environments, yes, and communications.
That's brilliant, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to hear from 2 businesses who have already made significant steps forward in their plastic waste and sustainable journey. So I'm going to go over to Adam at Internet Fusion Group first. Adam, if you could take us through your experiences, that would be great.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Beth. So Internet Fusion Group is a group of online retailers, websites. We cover outdoor action sports, a wide range of different sports. So naturally, our customer base cares about the environment, as we do. And one of the major factors that we can have influence on alongside climate or carbon is plastic reduction. So I'll lead with some of the headlines. In 2019, we reached 99.81% plastic free for our outbound packaging. You can see a photo there. That was made up of 94.44% recycled content. So that squarely addresses that issue that when you go from plastic to cardboard, as we have, that concern around deforestation, we've actually selected recycled content packaging to squarely address that. I think perhaps most importantly, we've invested in exact size packaging machines. Now that goes straight to the reduction objective. It's not always good enough just to replace. You actually need to reduce first. So we have reduced dramatically, and then we've replaced. What that's also done is it means there's 90 less lorry loads on the road each year from us. So there's a carbon win there as well. In our warehouse, we have 94.04% recycling rate. We're a zero to landfill operation. But perhaps more importantly, we influence the 800 brands that supply us through a delivery policy, which is a best practice guide, a traffic light system for every single packaging element that the brands send us. The red zone, we no longer accept. The orange zone is the minimum accepted standard, and the green zone is what we should all be targeting. It's a live document which we consistently update and push out to those 800 brands. So we're physically influencing our industry. We also want to influence our customer base. We have a large customer base. It's well above the millions. So we support an organisation called 2 Minute Organisation, and they have the 2 Minute Beach Clean, 2 Minute Street Clean, 2 Minute Litter Pick, 2 Minute Solutions. So that's a way of actually saying to our customers, hey, come along with us on this journey. But perhaps the most interesting part of what we do that seems to perk everybody's ears up is this second image, the circle that you can see, the first slide, there we go, the model that we've used. The bad news about reverting to cardboard boxes, they're 110% more expensive. You put that to any financial director, you're not going to get very far, as I didn't. So we took a holistic approach to sustainability. As most people will know, the first rule of sustainability is to reduce. If you reduce, you save money. So everything below that red line was savings. This is drastically simplified, and there's lots more measures within this. So we ring-fenced that money and reinvested it into the expense, which was the 110% more expensive cardboard box, which is above that red line. Now, in that first year, sorry, I should emphasise the point. We started this project in 2015. So in 2015, over 2.5 million packages sent. The net cost was 900 quid. And actually, by the end of that year, because our recycling rates were so good and our sortation was so good, it actually became a net positive activation. So it clearly can be done, and it can be done in a successful business. And if you take a holistic approach to your sustainability, you can actually make it a net positive activation. So what's that achieved for us? Well, you can see down the bottom there the new plastic economy and the document which was discussed at the World Economic Forum in Davos by Angela Merkel and some of her counterparts. We have secured a quote in there, and actually we're going to be a case study for the next document that comes out. Why is that important? Well, actually, that's what governments use to inform policy. So actually what we're doing is we're not only influencing our 800 brands, but hopefully we're influencing wider industry. The middle image there, that's Northern Ireland Houses of Parliament. One of our proudest moments is we were asked to present there what our activation was about to reduce plastic pollution. And we've also become a case study for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. But I want to just draw attention to the next slide, because there's often a criticism when you simply replace which is our headline activation, the 99.81% plastic free. But actually, what we all need to be doing is we need to be working across the waste hierarchy. And there's no silver bullet here. There's no one fixed solution. We need to be working in all areas apart from disposal. Nobody should be working in disposal in 2020. So as you can see, we've got the waste hierarchy on the left, and then we've got the inbound category, operational category, and then outbound part. So in reduce, our delivery policy asks our brands, the inbound products that comes into us, to reduce the amount of plastic they send us. Operationally, we have the automated packaging machines, which makes exact size packaging, so we've reduced the amount of packaging we need. And then our outbound packaging is now 99.81% plastic free. Around redesign, we've supported an absolute success story of FlexiHex, which I would encourage anyone to go and have a look at, which is a redesign of protective packaging using cardboard, recycled cardboard, which is completely biodegradable. And that also refers to our outbound packaging, which we've actually asked brands to use it in inbound, and we send it out to our customers. We reuse cardboard boxes, we use pallet containers rather than using shrink wrap. In recycle, we have a delivery policy which insists that our brands use recycled content. Operationally, as I said, 94.04 recycling rates. With our outbound, we have started removing the poly bag from the brand's products. So take the Humble t-shirt, we make use of that protective packaging all the way up until the last minute. And before it goes to the customer, which we don't know what will happen with that poly bag, we remove it and we ensure it's recycled through a third party, a trusted third party. And as you can see there, our packaging is 94.44 recycled content. And then recovery. So no one really should be working with recovery either, but 5.96% of our waste is actually incinerated for energy to recovery. So I just wanted to make that point that although we lead with that 99.81% plastic free, there's a whole lot of work that goes on outside of that throughout the waste hierarchy, which we all need to address. But that's it from me.
That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you. Those statistics and the work you've done is really impressive. Okay, so we'll move over to Alan now. Can you tell us about the work that Meadow Foods has been doing?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Beth. So we're Meadow Foods, we're dairy, non-dairy and inclusions food manufacturing. And we use a lot of plastic, and the numbers, like they are in a lot of businesses, are sort of buried in the financials, if you like. So the first task was for us to pull those numbers out, and as we can see on the plastic purchased over the last 3 years, we're just making it visible to the wider audience within the business to realize we've got to do something about this. Then we asked ourselves the question, what do we do with that plastic? Where does it come from? How do we do it? And we quickly realized that actually the sites don't have a lot of plastic left over when it comes to the plastic, the recycling of plastic. As you can see by the numbers there, all our plastic is going out to our customers, and we don't really know what happens to it after there. So we pulled together a plastics team, if you like, and started asking some of these questions. How is plastic waste at each of our sites disposed of? So the first thing we've gone and done is make sure that all our plastic, which it comes from, ironically, the packaging around the packaging that comes in for us to use for our products. So we've ensured that we were recycling that, and we've also now become a zero waste to landfill company. And then we looked at what can we do to reduce our plastic in the packaging. So some of the simple stuff we were doing is reducing some of the microns, and you can see some of the numbers there, reduced 10 microns per bag, and which equated to 7.5 million microns of plastic reduction. One thing we did find out was we couldn't convert microns to weight. There was no calculation for it, which would have been nice, because that would always goes well as well when you're talking to the more interested parties. And then we looked at redesign, and we've put policies in place where MPD, when they're looking at new products development, what type of packaging we're going to use, what's necessary, what's not necessary, and how we can reduce that. If we can just move on to the next slide, please, Beth. So within our group, we looked at some of our challenges. Single-use plastic has been mentioned within this forum. We've got liners, pergolas, bags, buckets, and even though they're recyclable, they're all single-use, and we can't reuse them again for our food. As we talk about down on this next slide here, that we can only use virgin plastic because of the risk from leachates entering the product, so they're not classed as food safe. So we're tied by different guidances and policies, so we can't use recycling stuff there. So then we looked at what can we do next. So I think this is where this system comes into its own, really. It was like identify the types of plastics used, quantities used. So as Dave was mentioning before, create a register. So we identified we need to create a register, and we can track the different plastics. We can track the quantities on which customers take what. And then taking it a step further is identify from our customers, communicate with them, and almost like a duty of care, what do they do with it, and add that to the register as well. And then update any register with any new packaging requirements moving forward, and obviously, as we talked with LRQA, be audited against that. And I think that's the next progressive step, and that's why Meadow Foods have happily joined this program, because it's definitely the way we see ourselves going.
That's brilliant, thank you. What really struck me during that is for both businesses, it's about asking yourself those questions at the start of the journey to really have a better understanding of your plastic use and how you can make improvements. Thank you very much for that, Alan. Okay, so Dave, can I ask you to do a sort of quick summary and recap of what we've covered today, both in terms of how we can help tackle the problem of plastic waste, but also perhaps give benefits to organisations that want to get involved?
Thank you very much, Beth. Yes, certainly. So as businesses, we should really see the challenge of tackling plastic as a huge opportunity. I mentioned we throw away billions of dollars worth of resources each year in this linear way of thinking. So tackling plastic waste can lead to increased sales and certainly to protect sales. And I think our two invited organisations today are demonstrating that through that engagement and through the work that they're doing, indeed these things are happening. And if we think about it, consumers are aware of the issues of plastic. It's in the media. They're subjected to the issues of plastic all the time, and consumers respond. And surveys have proven this. Consumers respond, to businesses that do take these steps and make positive efforts. Plastic is probably the second biggest challenge, in consumers' eyes, next to climate change, and indeed it's a part of climate change as well in carbon. So green credentials, that are verified through the RPM certification will give robust and credibility to businesses that make these commitments. This protects brands, it protects brand reputation, and it also gives recognition to these businesses which have been leading, if you like, in that sense. And we're inviting businesses to contact us and get active in this regard. And if we look at the next slide, I think we'll see that we're asking businesses to see sense. And responsible plastic management makes C sense. And the C, of course, stands for chief financial officers. They're always looking for ways to reduce operating costs, and waste and plastic waste is a cost. So, through engaging with the RPM program, I think we can help businesses reduce that cost. Chief legal officers, they're dealing with compliance burdens and liability challenges on an ongoing basis. And there will be new legislation as well that comes in around plastic. And we're saying RPM can help businesses get ahead of the curve, get their businesses organized, get those statistics together and start taking that journey. Chief innovation and marketing officers, by rethinking plastic, it helps to inspire things like new product development, new services for customers, and it acts as a tool to win customers as well. And then finally, chief sustainability officers, through engaging in the RPM and connecting with the wider plastic value chain, this will help to forge new alliances, new opportunities for businesses, and help them deliver those sustainability objectives. So really, yeah, we're hoping the RPM program is something of interest to all businesses across all sectors, and will help those businesses get on a positive journey and contribute to a more circular economy overall. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. Lots of ammunition there if you need to have that persuasive conversation internally in your organisation to get people to buy in. Okay, brilliant. So we're going to move to the Q&A now. We've had a number of questions come in while we've been talking, so thank you for submitting those. So the first question is, Dave, I'm going to ask you to address this one if I may. The sustainability agenda is being driven by the consumer. As a business focus standard, does RPM have a desire to drive awareness with the consumer at some point?
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, good question. Absolutely. And it's important that consumers become aware of the damage that plastic is causing in the environment, and they are becoming more and more aware of this. And consumers want to make smart choices. They do want to help. And we need to help them understand what those smart choices are in terms of how to avoid plastics. Change culture, change habits, if you wish, and how to deal with plastic in terms of, which bin does it go into? And there's an enormous challenge just in that alone, in educating consumers in understanding the difference between soft plastics, hard plastics, the different types of resins. It's a complicated thing that we need to try and educate consumers with. And indeed, our 101 awareness training is designed to fit both, staff within businesses, but it also will work at a consumer level as well. And we intend to take those steps and introduce these types of education pieces, if you like, into communities.
Brilliant, thank you. Adam, this next question, I think I'm going to hand over to you. With the standard covering so many different industries, are there any common plastic concerns which all potential businesses should be looking to address as a priority, so based on your experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we touched on it earlier, but the unnecessary packaging, plastic packaging, that crosses all sectors, and we see it in our shops when you see fruit and vegetables wrapped in plastic. The insanity of that is ridiculous. In our sector, we sometimes have a product that comes in its own bag. So a good example would be roof racks, soft roof racks that you can actually zip into its own bag for storage. But then sometimes the brand put it in a poly bag as well. It's an unnecessary plastic is the first point of call. You might have staff uniforms that turn up to your office and you distribute them straight away to everybody in the office. But actually every single one is in an individual poly bag. That's unnecessary. They could all come in one and you could reduce straight away. So unnecessary plastic, and this is a symptom of the proliferation of plastic and the fact that almost the plastics industry is on steroids at the moment. Then there is single-use plastic, and I'm a bit nervous around that term because it's very difficult to define, and we get tied up in knots around it. But plastic that is only designed to be used at a limited amount of time, that needs to be avoided. But I am nervous around that because I'm fortunate enough to be only 200 meters away from a beach right now in my office. And actually the vast majority of plastics I see on the tide line, it isn't single-use plastic. So I would say that we need to look at poorly managed plastic, and we need to begin to change our mindset across all sectors as to what is happening to this plastic that we're producing or we're putting out into the world. Where is this going? Whether it's single use, whether it's unnecessary or not, we need to look at everything and look at how that's going to be managed going forwards, because it's not good enough to put a time scale on it and say, well, it's going to last 2 weeks rather than just being single use or 2 years, if it's all going to end up in the ocean anyway. So yeah, I think for me, the absolute starting point for any industry sector is to get rid of unnecessary, is to begin to look at those real short-term use plastics, but then really start looking at anything you put out there and what is going to happen with it. And that applies across every sector.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm jealous of the fact you're only 200 metres from the beach. What, out of interest, what when you go to the beach, what's the most common type of sort of plastic waste that you see?
Well, the particular beach that I'm on has an issue with microplastics. So you know, it's things like containers. So you'll have a lot from the fishing industry. So the plastic fishing containers. You know, there's a lot of toys. You know, beach toys. Yeah, so it's the chunkier piece of plastics that are breaking down into smaller pieces. Because this beach here is actually raked, we don't have the kind of common stuff that you get on some beaches where, you know, you get a plastic bottle washed up or a straw. Yeah, so it's kind of fragmented pieces of bulkier plastic that it essentially isn't single-use plastics.
Right, okay, God, it's just sad to see any sort, isn't it, really? Okay, so this next question, Kimberly, can I ask you to pick up this one? My business has been deeply disrupted by COVID, and we've postponed audits for standards which require on-site visits. So is RPM something that can be delivered remotely, or will businesses have to wait for that face-to-face visit? Very timely, that one.
Yeah, very timely, Beth. And look, as an organisation, LR has done a lot of work in this space around remote auditing and blended audits, whereby, you know, looking at what is achievable and what's not achievable. I think first and foremost is that stage one process from a certification perspective can certainly be done 100% remotely through either document submission or through sharing, active sharing, and looking at that level of preparedness for organizations. I think the second part of the stage two piece, the initial assessment piece, there are elements of that as well that can be quite effectively undertaken from a remote technology perspective. There will be some challenges by way of especially kind of confirming, if you will, that, you know, all plastics and plastic use and implementation of some practices might be challenged through a remote solution. However, we have seen that the use of live streaming can be quite effective in actually getting auditors' eyes and ears into operations and looking at those on-site practices through essentially human drones and directing those human drones internally within your organization to help us obtain the necessary objective evidence that we need to see from a verification perspective.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Okay, so the next question is, do you think governmental commitments to building back better will include legislation around plastic use? Alan, can I ask you to answer that one, please?
Yeah, sure, Beth. Currently, I can't see nothing in the building back better legislation that mentions plastic. It could come into its own, but I mean, there's legislation around plastics currently, like the packaging waste regulations and plastic packaging tax, and I think the government's doing it wrong, that they're just looking at punishing companies for using plastic, and they're not getting to the point where we're trying to reduce the plastic in the first place. So really what we should be asking the government is to look, you know, at the plastic manufacturing, looking at redesign of plastics, making them less complicated, so it's just easier from the design point of view, and then really engaging with all the interested parties, trying to identify these challenges through the chain and how we can make these necessary changes. And another issue that I'm sure everyone's aware of is the infrastructure. We've relied so heavily over the years of exporting our plastics, and now the exports are drying up. Our infrastructure just isn't in place, and I really do believe the government really needs to set out goals and policies to help build that infrastructure within this country.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think we've got time for one more. So, Dave, this is about RPM, so I'll put this one to you. Which countries is RPM available in, and how many audits do multi-site businesses require?
Oh, okay. Thanks, Beth. RPM is a global program already, so it's available internationally to organisations in all parts of the world, and indeed we're building a network of resources, to support that, and also alongside Lloyd's Register in terms of their auditing capacity and certification capacity. So yeah, it's available globally, and we want to make sure that we can meet that growing interest, certainly. And then the second part of that, multi-site audits. So there's already established processes within third-party certification that help to sort of define how to undertake sampling of multi-site organizations and still deliver robust, let's say, statistically relevant outcomes in terms of certifications. And Lloyd's Register will know these as well, and be actively using these across a lot of the programs that they operate. So yeah, there will be an approach for multi-site audits, and ultimately, we're committed to delivering a robust and credible third-party assurance for businesses, but we recognize that that's also got to meet the demands of businesses in terms of it has to be cost effective and it has to be efficient for it to work effectively.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. I've put a couple of web links to pages on there. So if you are listening and you want more information, you can visit either of those to get more details. There will be an on-demand version of this webinar available in the coming days as well for you. So a huge thank you to our panel, Dave, Kimberly, Brona, Adam and Alan. Thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who has listened in. I hope you found it useful. Thank you again, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.